Welcome to the dumbest explanation of the 1929 stock market crash you'll ever hear. I'm going to break down how America basically turned the economy into a giant casino and then acted all surprised when the house came crashing down. We got speculators, we got bankers doing sketchy stuff, and we got regular people throwing their life savings at pieces of paper like they were buying lottery tickets. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for anybody. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1920s, everybody's having a grand old time dancing the Charleston and drinking illegal booze because, prohibition. The economy is booming, people are making money hand over fist, and everybody thinks they're a genius investor. The stock market is going up, up, up like a rocket ship to the moon, and people are like, this is it, boys. We've cracked the code. Stocks only go up. But here's the thing nobody wanted to admit. The whole system had turned into a massive bubble filled with hot air and terrible decisions. From 1921 to 1929, the Dow Jones went from 63 points all the way up to 381 points. That's like a six-fold increase in 8 years. If that doesn't scream something fishy is going on, then I don't know what does. But did anybody listen to reason? Hell no. Instead, they doubled down on the stupidity. The summer of 1929 was basically one giant party where everyone lost their minds. People were doing dance marathons, sitting on flagpoles for days just because they could, and throwing money at stocks like confetti at a wedding. The entire country had caught what we like to call speculative fever, which is basically when common sense goes out the window and greed takes the wheel. Cab drivers were giving stock tips, shoe shiners were talking about their portfolios, and your grandmother was probably buying shares in companies she couldn't even pronounce. Irving Fisher, who was supposed to be some big-shot economist, looked at this madness and declared that stock prices had reached what he called a permanently high plateau. Permanently high plateau. That's like saying your house is permanently on fire or your car is permanently in a ditch. Spoiler alert, Irving. Nothing in economics is permanent, especially when it's built on wishful thinking and fairy dust. The average price-to-earnings ratio of stocks hit 32.6 in September 1929. For those of you who don't speak finance nerd, that's basically like paying $32 for something that's only worth $1. It's like buying a hamburger for the price of a fancy steak dinner and convincing yourself you got a good deal because the hamburger has potential. But wait, it gets worse. Investment trusts are popping up everywhere like mushrooms after rain. These things went from 172 trusts at the beginning of 1929 to over 400 by the end of August. They represented 22% of all stock issues and hit $2.25 billion. What's an investment trust, you ask? Think of it as a fancy way to gamble with other people's money while pretending you're being sophisticated about it. Now here's where things get really stupid. People figured out they could buy stocks without actually having the money to pay for them. This brilliant strategy was called buying on margin, and it was basically the financial equivalent of playing with fire while standing in a gasoline factory. Here's how this genius system worked. You want to buy $1,000 worth of stock, but you only have $100 in your pocket. No problem. Just put down that $100, and the bank or your friendly neighborhood stockbroker will lend you the other $900. Easy peasy, right? What could possibly go wrong? By August 1929, brokers were lending small investors more than 2/3 of the face value of whatever stocks they were buying. Over $8.5 billion was out on loan. To put that in perspective, that was more than all the actual cash circulating in the entire United States at the time. The country was basically running on IOUs and crossed fingers. The math seems simple enough for these financial geniuses. You put down $100, buy $1,000 worth of stock, and when that stock goes up to $1,075, you just made $75 on your $100 investment. Boom, you're rich. Time to buy a yacht and retire to Florida. Except there was one tiny little problem that everybody conveniently forgot about. You still had to pay back that $900 you borrowed, plus interest rates that were somewhere between 14 and 19%. So that $75 profit you thought you made? Yeah, that existed only in your imagination and on paper. In reality, you were probably losing money faster than a tourist in Vegas. This whole margin buying thing brought hundreds of thousands of new investors into the market. People who had no business buying stocks were suddenly playing with money they didn't have, betting on companies they didn't understand, in an economy that was basically held together with duct tape and optimism. The beauty of this system was that it worked perfectly as long as stock prices kept going up. But the moment prices stopped rising or, God forbid, started falling, the whole thing would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. Because when stock prices dropped, brokers would make margin calls, demanding that investors either put up more cash or sell their stocks to pay back their loans. Picture this scenario. You bought $1,000 worth of stock with $100 down. The stock price drops to $900. Suddenly, your investment is worth less than what you owe the broker. The broker calls you up and says, "Hey buddy, you need to give us more money right now or we're selling your stocks." But you don't have more money because you already spent everything you had. So they sell your stocks at a loss, you lose your $100, and you still owe them money on top of that. Now multiply this scenario by hundreds of thousands of investors all doing the same thing at the same time, and you start to see how this brilliant system was actually a financial time bomb waiting to explode. Every margin call forced more people to sell their stocks, which drove prices down further, which triggered more margin calls, which forced more selling. It was like a tornado of stupidity that kept getting bigger and more destructive. But nobody wanted to think about these unpleasant possibilities because everyone was too busy counting their imaginary profits and planning their early retirement. The entire market had become a giant pyramid scheme where everyone was convinced they could sell their stocks to the next sucker for a higher price. Investment trusts were making this problem even worse by creating these insane pyramid structures where trusts owned other trusts that owned other trusts. It was like a Russian nesting doll made of debt and delusion. Goldman Sachs looked at this whole mess and said, "Hold my beer, we're going to show you how to really screw things up." In December 1928, they created something called the Goldman Sachs Trading Corporation, which sounds fancy and official but was basically a financial Frankenstein monster that would make Dr. Frankenstein himself say, "Dude, maybe dial it back a notch." This thing launched with $50 million in capital and another $50 million in cash surplus. Which sounds impressive until you realize it was all built on the same shaky foundation as everything else. Goldman bought 1 million shares at $100 each, then turned around and sold 90% of them to the public for $104 per share. So they made $4 million right off the bat just for being the middleman. Not a bad gig if you can get it, but here's where Goldman really showed off their creativity in the art of financial stupidity. They decided one investment trust wasn't enough, so they created two more called Shenandoah Corporation and Blue Ridge Corporation. And here's the kicker. They structured these things like Russian nesting dolls from hell. Blue Ridge sat inside Shenandoah, Shenandoah sat inside Goldman Sachs Trading Corporation, and the whole thing created this massive leverage pyramid that would make ancient Egyptian pharaohs jealous. The leverage was so insane that tiny movements in the stock market would get amplified through this system like a financial earthquake. By the summer of 1929, Goldman Sachs Trading Corporation's stock was trading at $280 per share. People were throwing money at this thing like it was printing cash in the basement. Little did they know, they were basically buying tickets on the Titanic right before it hit the iceberg. Meanwhile, the warning signs were everywhere, but everybody was too drunk on easy money to notice. The economy was showing cracks, but people were like, "Everything's fine, this is fine, we're all fine." It was like being in a burning building and complaining about the heat while refusing to acknowledge the flames. Some smart cookies tried to warn people that this whole thing was unsustainable, but they got shouted down by the mob of wannabe millionaires who were convinced they had discovered the secret to eternal wealth. It's like trying to tell people at a party that the music is too loud while they're all having the time of their lives. The federal government was about as useful as a chocolate teapot during all this. They basically sat back and watched the whole country turn into a giant casino while twiddling their thumbs and probably placing their own bets on the side. Regulation was practically non-existent, and oversight was a foreign concept. Banks were acting like loan sharks with fancy letterhead, lending money to anybody with a pulse and a dream. They didn't care if you could actually pay back the loan because, hey, the stock market only goes up, right? It was like giving car keys to blind people and being surprised when there's a massive pileup on the highway. The writing was on the wall by early October 1929, but most people couldn't read or chose to ignore it. Some investors started getting nervous and began selling their positions, which caused prices to wobble a bit. But instead of taking this as a warning sign, most people saw it as a buying opportunity. October 24th, 1929 started like any other day, except it didn't. The market opened, and within the first 3 minutes, nearly 3 million shares changed hands, representing about $2 million in wealth just evaporating into thin air. It was like watching a magic trick, except instead of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, the magician made everyone's money disappear. The ticker tape couldn't keep up with all the trading, so people had no idea what their stocks were actually worth. It was like playing poker in the dark while someone kept changing the rules and stealing chips from the pot. Nearly 13 million shares were traded that day, which was a record that nobody wanted to break. Some big-shot bankers, including JP Morgan, tried to save the day by pooling their own money to prop up the market. It was like trying to stop a dam from breaking by plugging the hole with their fingers. Nice gesture, but ultimately about as effective as using a Band-Aid to fix a severed artery. The temporary intervention worked for about 5 minutes before the panic resumed with the intensity of a Category 5 hurricane. People realized that even the smart money was scared, which made everyone else even more terrified. Monday, October 28th, was like the sequel to a horror movie that nobody asked for. The market declined more than 22%, and another record number of stocks were traded. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just a temporary hiccup, but a full-blown financial apocalypse. Then came Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, which went down in history as the day the music finally stopped. More than 16 million stocks were traded, and the market lost $14 billion in a single day. To put that in perspective, that was more than the United States spent on World War I and 10 times what it cost to win the Civil War. The Dow Jones dropped 30.57 points, which was 11.73% in one day. People were running around Wall Street like chickens with their heads cut off, and some folks were literally jumping out of windows because they'd lost everything they owned and then some. The two-day crash wiped out $30 billion in market value, which was more money than most people could even comprehend. Meanwhile, our poster child for financial stupidity, Goldman Sachs Trading Corporation, was getting absolutely demolished. Remember that stock that was trading at $280 per share? Well, by January 1930, it had fallen to about $41. But wait, there's more. By 1932, that same stock was worth a whopping $1.25 per share. So if you invested $280,000 at the peak, congratulations. You now owned $1,250 worth of pretty much nothing. Think about that for a second. People went from feeling like financial geniuses to realizing they'd been playing the world's most expensive game of musical chairs, and the music had stopped with them holding bags full of worthless paper. Families lost their life savings overnight. People who thought they were set for retirement suddenly found themselves broke and starting over from scratch. So there you have it, folks. The 1929 stock market crash in all its ridiculous glory. America turned the economy into a casino. Everyone thought they were geniuses. And then reality came knocking with a baseball bat. Greed beat common sense. Margin buying destroyed families, and nobody learned to quit while they were ahead. The moral of the story: when everyone's getting rich quick, somebody's about to get screwed real hard.